The warning beacons had been broadcasting the same message for over 300 cycles across 17 different star systems. Every spacefaring civilization in the galaxy knew about Pyraxis Prime, the death world where dragons ruled supreme. The planet's crimson atmosphere glowed like a furnace from orbit, and its surface temperature averaged 47 degrees Celsius on a cool day. But it wasn't the heat that kept explorers away, it was the dragons. Captain Zara Vex of the Altrian Survey Corps adjusted her environmental suit's cooling system as she reviewed the mission briefings in her ship's cramped quarters. The holographic display showed dozens of failed expeditions, each one ending the same way. Ships landed, crews disembarked, dragons attacked within minutes, survivors fled if they were lucky. The few grainy recordings that survived showed creatures the size of cargo haulers with scales like molten metal and breath that could melt through reinforced hull plating. 17 different species have attempted contact, she muttered, scrolling through the casualty reports. Altarians, Centauri Collective, even the war-crazy Draxians got their tails handed to them. What makes Command think we'll be different? Her second-in-command, Lieutenant Korvac, poked his scaled head through the doorway. The reptilian officer's forked tongue flicked nervously as he spoke. The human consultant has arrived, Captain. He's unusual. Zara sighed and made her way to the docking bay. The Galactic Council had insisted on bringing along a human expert for this mission, though she couldn't understand why. Humans were relatively new to the galactic community, having only achieved faster-than-light travel 50 years ago. They were known for their strange customs and even stranger food preferences, but dragon expertise? That seemed unlikely. The airlock hissed open, and Marcus Chen stepped aboard carrying what appeared to be several large metal containers and a worn leather bag. He was average height for a human, with dark hair streaked with gray and arms that looked like they'd seen plenty of manual labor. What struck Zara immediately was his complete lack of fear. Every other expedition member she'd worked with showed some level of anxiety when facing the unknown, but this human seemed relaxed, almost cheerful. Captain Vex, I presume? Marcus extended his hand in the odd human greeting ritual. Marcus Chun, barbecue specialist, and apparently your dragon consultant. Sorry I'm late. Had to pick up some special ingredients. Zara cautiously shook his hand, noting the firm grip and calloused skin. Mr. Chun, I've reviewed your file. You're listed as a civilian contractor with expertise in cooking? I'm not sure how that qualifies you for first contact with hostile dragons. Marcus chuckled and hefted one of his metal containers. Captain, have you ever considered why every expedition ends in violence? Maybe it's not that the dragons are inherently hostile. Maybe they're just hungry. Before Zara could respond, her communications officer's voice crackled over the intercom. Captain, we're receiving another distress signal from Pyraxis Prime. It's the Centauri research vessel Luminous Dawn. They've been trapped on the surface for 6 days. Zara's blood chilled. The Centauri were master diplomats, known for their ability to negotiate with even the most aggressive species. If they were trapped, the situation was worse than anyone thought. How many survivors? Unknown, Captain. The signal is automated, but it's getting weaker. Marcus set down his containers and moved toward the bridge. Captain, with respect, we need to move fast. Those people don't have much time, and this might be our only chance to try something different. As the ship entered the Pyraxis system, the view screen filled with the angry red disk of the planet. Thermal scans showed massive heat signatures moving across the surface. The dragons were active and numerous. The wreckage of previous expeditions dotted the landscape like metal scars on the planet's hide. There, Korvac pointed to a blip on the sensors. The Centauri ship. It's crashed in a valley about 50 kilometers from the primary nesting sites. Zara studied the tactical display. The valley was surrounded by mountainous terrain, perfect for aerial ambushes. Every previous mission had been attacked within minutes of landing. Mr. Chun, last chance to reconsider. Those dragons have killed hundreds of explorers. Marcus was already suiting up in borrowed environmental gear. Captain, in my line of work, I've learned that food is a universal language. These dragons might be apex predators, but they're still living creatures with basic needs. Sometimes the best way to make friends is to offer them a good meal. The shuttle descent was tense, but uneventful. As they broke through the crimson clouds, the landscape below revealed itself as a hellish wonderland of volcanic peaks and steaming valleys. Crystalline formations jutted from the ground like frozen lightning, and rivers of what appeared to be liquid mercury wound between black rock formations. Landing zone in sight, announced their pilot, a nervously twitchy insectoid named Buzz. Centauri ship is, well, it's in pieces, but I'm reading life signs. The shuttle touched down with a bone-jarring thud on a flat section of volcanic rock. Through the viewports, they could see the scattered remains of the luminous dawn spread across the valley floor. Part of the hull had been melted into abstract sculptures, and massive claw marks scored the metal. Movement, Korvac hissed, pointing toward the mountain peaks. Multiple heat signatures incoming. Zara's heart hammered as she watched the sensors. 3 massive shapes were descending from the peaks, their wings casting shadows like storm clouds. Battle stations. Prepare for immediate departure if, wait. Marcus placed a calm hand on her shoulder. Captain, trust me on this. Everyone stays calm, and let me handle first contact. Before anyone could stop him, Marcus activated the cargo bay doors and began unloading his equipment. The metal containers turned out to contain portable grills, fuel cells, and various cooking implements. The leather bag was full of spices and marinades that filled the air with exotic aromas even through their environmental suits. He's insane, Buzz chittered. Those things will be here in 30 seconds. Marcus worked with practiced efficiency, setting up his grill and lighting the burners. The blue flames danced in the alien atmosphere as he pulled vacuum-sealed packages from his containers. Sometimes you have to take risks to make a connection. Dragons in human mythology were always portrayed as intelligent beings, not mindless monsters. The first dragon landed with an earth-shaking impact 50 meters away. It was even more magnificent and terrifying than the recordings had suggested. 20 meters long from snout to tail, with scales that shifted from deep red to gold in the alien sunlight. Its eyes were the size of dinner plates and glowed with an intelligence that was unmistakably sentient. The dragon's head swung toward the shuttle, nostrils flaring. Its mouth opened slightly, revealing teeth like gleaming swords and the beginning of an ominous inner glow that suggested imminent incineration. Then, the wind shifted, carrying the aroma from Marcus's grill across the valley. The dragon's head snapped toward the cooking area, its massive nostrils flaring wider. The threatening glow in its throat faded as it took another deep breath. For a moment that seemed to stretch for hours, predator and prey studied each other across the wasteland. Marcus calmly turned over the steaks he was grilling, thick cuts of Terran beef he'd brought specially for the occasion. The meat sizzled and popped, releasing rich smoke into the thin atmosphere. He added a sprinkle of his secret seasoning blend, a mixture of earth spices that had taken him years to perfect. Easy there, big guy, he said softly, not looking directly at the dragon but keeping his movements slow and non-threatening. Just cooking up some lunch. You're welcome to join me. The dragon took a cautious step forward, then another. Its massive head lowered toward the grill, and it inhaled deeply. A rumbling sound emerged from its throat, not aggressive, but almost curious. The second and third dragons landed nearby, drawn by the scent. They formed a loose semicircle around the grilling human, but their postures were more inquisitive than hostile. Their heads swayed slightly as they tracked the movement of the cooking meat. Incredible, Zara breathed. They're not attacking. They're waiting. Marcus flipped the steaks again, the meat now perfectly seared with crosshatch marks from the grill. In my experience, Captain, hunger makes everyone cranky. Maybe these guys have just been having trouble finding a decent meal. As if responding to his words, one of the dragons, a slightly smaller one with more pronounced gold coloring, took another step forward. It lowered its massive head until it was only a few meters from Marcus, who continued cooking as if having a conversation with 20-meter dragons was perfectly normal. That's it, he murmured encouragingly. I bet you haven't had a properly seasoned meal in years, have you? The dragon's response was a soft huffing sound that somehow seemed almost like agreement. Marcus carefully cut one of the steaks into smaller portions and placed them on a metal plate. Moving very slowly, he set the plate on the ground between himself and the golden dragon. Here you go. Prime Terran beef with my special blend of herbs and spices. I'd recommend letting it cool a bit first. The dragon studied the offering for a long moment, then delicately picked up a piece of meat with the tip of one massive claw. It brought the morsel to its mouth and chewed thoughtfully. Its eyes, previously cold and predatory, seemed to widen slightly. Then, to everyone's amazement, the dragon's throat vibrated with what could only be described as a purr. The other dragons pressed closer, their earlier hostility replaced by unmistakable interest. Marcus grinned and fired up a second grill. Looks like I'm going to need more steaks. As the sun began to set over Pyraxis Prime, casting long shadows across the valley, an unprecedented scene unfolded. Three of the galaxy's most feared predators sat in a rough circle around a human barbecue chef, sharing the first cooked meal they had ever experienced. The air filled with the sound of contented rumbling as the dragons discovered the joys of properly seasoned food. "Sir," Buzz whispered over the comm, "the Centauri survivors are signaling from their emergency shelter. They want to know what's happening." Zara watched in fascination as Marcus offered another plate of food to the largest dragon, who accepted it with what appeared to be genuine gratitude. "Tell them," she said slowly, "that we're having a barbecue. And I think we're going to need more supplies." 3 days had passed since Marcus Chin's impromptu barbecue had prevented what should have been another massacre on Pyraxis Prime. The emergency shelter containing the Centauri survivors had been successfully evacuated, but the real work was just beginning. Word of the peaceful contact had spread through galactic channels faster than light-speed communication, and now the valley floor resembled a small spaceport with ships from a dozen different species. Marcus stood beside his expanded cooking station, which now included 4 industrial-grade grills and a refrigeration unit that Captain Vex had requisitioned from their supply ship. The 3 dragons he'd first encountered had become regular dinner guests, though he'd learned they each had distinct personalities and preferences. The Golden One, who had been the first to try his cooking, seemed to be the leader of the local group. Marcus had started calling her Ember, despite not knowing how to determine dragon gender. Ember preferred her meat medium rare with just a touch of his smoky spice blend. The largest dragon, whom Marcus dubbed Titan, liked his steaks well done with extra salt. The third, smaller than the others but with striking blue-tinted scales, had developed a taste for the grilled vegetables Marcus prepared as side dishes. "The anthropological implications are staggering," Dr. Elon Soth was saying as she scribbled notes on her data pad. The Centauri xenobiologist had insisted on staying to observe what she called the most significant first contact event in galactic history. Her normally pristine white robes were now stained with barbecue sauce and volcanic dust. "They're clearly sapient," she continued, gesturing toward Ember, who was carefully examining a new spice that Marcus had introduced. "Watch how she evaluates each flavor component separately before combining them. That level of analytical thinking rivals most spacefaring species." Marcus nodded as he seasoned another batch of meat. Over the past few days, he'd been experimenting with different preparations, treating each meal as both a cultural exchange and a cooking lesson. "They're definitely smart. Ember's been bringing me local plants to try. Some of them make excellent seasonings." As if summoned by the mention of her name, Ember approached the cooking area carrying something in her massive jaws. She set down what appeared to be a cluster of crystalline pods that glowed with soft bioluminescence. "Careful," warned Commander Thex of the Draxian military expedition that had arrived the previous day. The battle-scarred warrior had been skeptical of the peaceful approach until he'd witnessed dragons sharing food with their former prey. Unknown organic compounds could be toxic. Marcus examined the pods with the interest of a professional chef discovering a new ingredient. "She's been bringing me things for 2 days now. Everything's been edible, even delicious. I think she's trying to teach me about local cuisine." He carefully cracked open one of the pods, releasing a sweet aroma that reminded him of cinnamon mixed with something he couldn't identify. A small sample on his tongue confirmed it was not only safe, but incredibly flavorful, like a combination of spice and fruit with a subtle heat that built slowly. "This is amazing," he said, looking up at Ember's massive golden eyes. "Thank you." The dragon's response was a gentle rumble that Marcus had learned indicated pleasure or approval. She settled down nearby to watch as he incorporated her gift into the marinade he was preparing. The peaceful scene was interrupted by the arrival of another ship, this one bearing the aggressive angular design of the Hegemony war fleet. Captain Vex's voice crackled over Marcus's comm unit. "Marcus, we've got incoming. The Hegemony is sending a battle cruiser. Their advance team is requesting immediate landing clearance." Marcus frowned as he watched the dark ship descend toward the valley. The Hegemony was known for their military-first approach to everything, including first contact situations. Any word on their intentions? "They're claiming jurisdiction over Pyraxis Prime under the hostile world protocols. Apparently, they consider the dragons a threat that needs to be neutralized." The 3 dragons around Marcus's grilling station had also noticed the new arrival. Their postures shifted subtly, not to the aggressive stance Marcus had seen in the old recordings, but to something more alert and protective. Ember moved closer to Marcus, positioning herself between him and the landing site. The hegemony shuttle touched down with military precision, and its occupants emerged in full combat armor. Their leader, identified by rank insignia as Colonel Voss, strode directly toward the cooking area with his weapon systems powered but not yet aimed. Civilian contractor Chun, Voss announced in the clipped tones of military authority. By order of the Hegemony Council, you are to cease all contact with hostile alien entities and evacuate immediately. This planet is being designated a military quarantine zone. Marcus continued seasoning his steaks, not looking up from his work. Colonel, with respect, these aren't hostile entities. They're neighbors who've never been properly introduced. Neighbors. Voss's helmet-amplified voice carried a tone of disbelief. These creatures have killed hundreds of explorers. They've destroyed every peaceful expedition that's attempted contact. Because those expeditions never bothered to bring anything to the table, Marcus replied calmly. Literally, when someone shows up in your backyard uninvited and empty-handed, you tend to assume they're up to no good. Ember growled softly at Voss's aggressive tone and posture. The sound made the hegemony soldiers take an involuntary step back, hands moving toward their weapons. The tension in the air became thick enough to cut with a knife. Easy, girl, Marcus said soothingly, placing a reassuring hand on Ember's scaled flank. The massive dragon calmed at his touch, though her eyes remained fixed on the armored soldiers. Colonel, I'd suggest you power down your weapons and take a more diplomatic approach. Ember here is very protective of her friends. That thing is 20 meters of armored death, Voss snapped. It could incinerate this entire area in seconds. So could your warship, Marcus pointed out, flipping the steaks on his grill. But you haven't fired on us, have you? Maybe because you recognize that aggression isn't always the answer. Dr. Soth stepped forward, her scientific credentials giving her words weight even with military personnel. Colonel Voss, I've been documenting this contact for 3 days. These beings show clear signs of advanced intelligence, social structure, and peaceful intent when approached respectfully. Attacking them would be not only unnecessary, but potentially disastrous for galactic relations. Furthermore, added Captain Vex, who had arrived with her own security detail, my mission reports clearly established that the dragons only attacked when threatened. Every previous expedition came armed and ready for battle. Mr. Chen arrived with cooking supplies and an open mind. Voss looked around the valley, taking in the scene of dragons and aliens sharing space peacefully. Titan was lying nearby, apparently napping in the afternoon sun with his massive head resting near a group of Alterian researchers. The smaller blue-scale dragon was examining some recording equipment with obvious curiosity rather than hostility. This is unprecedented, Voss admitted reluctantly. But the hegemony has invested significant resources in a military solution. We have orbital bombardment platforms standing by. Then, stand them down, Marcus said, finally, looking directly at the colonel. Unless you want to explain to the Galactic Council why you started an interstellar war over a misunderstanding. As if to emphasize the point, Ember carefully picked up one of the grilled steaks with her claws and offered it to Marcus. The gesture was unmistakably peaceful, a predator sharing food with a much smaller, more vulnerable being. Marcus accepted the offering with a grateful nod and took a bite. The meat was perfectly cooked, infused with the flavors he'd been experimenting with. Thank you, Ember. That's delicious. The dragon's purring response filled the air, and even the hardened hegemony soldiers couldn't help but be affected by the obviously affectionate interaction. Colonel, Dr. Soth said quietly, you're witnessing something extraordinary. These beings aren't monsters, they're people. They have preferences, personalities, social bonds. They're trying to communicate through the universal language of shared meals. Voss was quiet for a long moment, his helmet sensors probably analyzing the situation from every angle. Finally, he powered down his weapons systems and removed his helmet, revealing a scarred face and tired eyes. Mr. Chun, he said slowly, the hegemony has lost a lot of good soldiers to these creatures. It's hard to see them as anything but threats. Marcus nodded understandingly. I get that, Colonel. But consider this. How many of those soldiers might still be alive if their ships had brought barbecue grills instead of plasma cannons? The question hung in the air as the sun continued its descent toward the horizon. The cooking fires cast dancing shadows across the valley, and the aroma of grilled meat mixed with alien spices created an atmosphere that was unmistakably welcoming. Perhaps, Voss said finally, We should postpone the military action pending further investigation. Ember, who had been watching the exchange with obvious intelligence, approached the colonel slowly. She lowered her massive head until they were at eye level, studying him with ancient golden eyes that seemed to look directly into his soul. Then, in a gesture that would be talked about in diplomatic circles for generations, she gently nudged a piece of grilled meat toward him with her nose. Colonel Voss stared at the offering for a long moment before carefully removing his armored gloves and accepting the food. He took a cautious bite, chewed thoughtfully, and his expression gradually shifted from suspicion to wonder. "It's actually quite good," he said, sounding surprised. Marcus grinned and fired up another grill. "Colonel, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship. Now, how do you feel about teaching a dragon to appreciate proper military field rations? I've got some ideas for improving the recipe." As the first stars appeared in Pyraxis Prime's crimson sky, the valley floor buzzed with unprecedented activity. Representatives from a dozen species worked alongside dragons to establish what was rapidly becoming the galaxy's most unusual diplomatic mission. Cooking fires dotted the landscape, and the air filled with a mixture of alien languages, dragon vocalizations, and the universal sounds of shared meals and new friendships. The dragons had stopped attacking intruders not because they were no longer capable of violence, but because they had finally found someone who approached them with respect, curiosity, and, most importantly, really good food. It was a lesson that would reshape galactic diplomacy for generations to come. 6 months after first contact, the valley on Pyraxis Prime had transformed into something unprecedented in galactic history. What had started as a simple barbecue had evolved into the Pyraxis Cultural Exchange Center, a sprawling complex of permanent structures that served as both diplomatic embassy and culinary institute. The dragons hadn't just accepted the presence of off-worlders. They had become active participants in creating the first truly interspecies community in known space. Marcus Chin stood on the observation deck of the new cultural center, watching the morning activities unfold below. Ember and her clutchmates, he learned that was the proper term for their family group, were leading a group of young Altarian diplomats through the crystalline gardens that the dragons had cultivated for centuries. The lesson appeared to be about local flora, with Ember carefully demonstrating which plants were edible and which ones made the best seasonings. "The transformation has been remarkable," said Ambassador Korath, the Galactic Council's official representative to Pyraxis Prime. The elderly Centauri diplomat had arrived 3 months ago to establish formal relations with what the dragons called the Fireheart Collective. "We're documenting advances in interspecies communication, agricultural techniques, and thermal engineering that will benefit the entire galaxy." Marcus nodded, though his attention was focused on a more immediate concern. Today marked the arrival of the Pyraxis Development Consortium, a corporate entity that had been pressuring the Galactic Council for mining rights on the planet. The Dragon's world contained vast deposits of thermal crystals, a rare mineral essential for advanced energy systems. The consortium had been remarkably persistent despite the protected status that had been granted to Pyraxis Prime. "Any word on when they're expected?" Marcus asked, checking his chronometer. "Their advanced team should be landing within the hour," Korath replied with obvious reluctance. "I've briefed them extensively on the cultural protocols we've established, but corporations aren't always known for their diplomatic sensitivity." Through the transparent aluminum windows, Marcus could see Titan working alongside a team of insectoid engineers to expand the thermal regulation systems that kept the cultural center comfortable for species that weren't adapted to Pyraxis Prime's intense heat. The massive dragon had proven to have an intuitive understanding of thermal dynamics that surpassed most university-trained specialists. The smaller blue-scaled dragon, who had eventually chosen the name Sapphire during one of their evening language exchange sessions, was teaching a group of young beings from various species how to identify edible crystals. Her patience with children was remarkable, and she had become something of a celebrity among the families of diplomatic staff. A soft chime indicated an incoming transmission. Captain Vex's voice filled the observation deck through the communication system. "Marcus, we've got incoming ships from the consortium. 3 heavy cargo haulers, and what looks like a mobile processing platform." Marcus's stomach tightened. The consortium's fleet was designed for industrial-scale mining operations, not cultural exchange. "Any signs of military escort?" "Negative, but they're broadcasting on emergency frequencies claiming they have Galactic Council authorization for mineral extraction surveys." Ambassador Korath's facial tentacles twitched with agitation. "That's impossible. The council specifically classified Pyraxis Prime as a protected cultural site. No industrial development is authorized. The first consortium ship settled onto the designated landing pad with a heavy thud that shook the entire complex. Through the windows, Marcus could see the dragons throughout the valley stopping their activities to watch the new arrivals. Their body language had shifted to the alert posture he remembered from those first tense moments 6 months ago. Ember looked up toward the observation deck, her golden eyes finding Marcus even at this distance. The communication was wordless, but clear. She wanted to know if these newcomers were friends or threats. "I'd better get down there," Marcus said, heading for the elevator. "And, Ambassador, you might want to review that council authorization. Something doesn't smell right about this." By the time Marcus reached the landing pad, a group of consortium representatives had disembarked and were setting up what appeared to be surveying equipment. Their leader, a tall human woman in an expensive business suit, was barking orders at subordinates who were obviously uncomfortable in the extreme heat despite their environmental suits. "Ms. Harrison, I presume?" Marcus approached with the easy confidence he'd learned during months of dragon diplomacy. "Marcus Chun, Director of Cultural Relations for the Pyraxis Exchange Center. Welcome to Pyraxis Prime." Victoria Harrison turned to face him with the predatory smile that corporate executives used when they sensed weakness. "Mr. Chun, yes, we've heard about your little cooking experiment. Very charming. Now, if you could direct us to your site manager, we have council authorization to begin preliminary mineral surveys." "I'm afraid there's been some mistake," Marcus replied calmly. "This planet has protected status under the Cultural Heritage Accords. No industrial development is permitted without unanimous consent from the resident species." Harrison's smile sharpened. "The resident species being dragons? I'm afraid corporate law doesn't recognize the rights of non-sapient animals, regardless of how well-trained they might be." The insult hung in the air like acid vapor. Around the landing pad, every dragon in sight had stopped what they were doing. Ember approached slowly, her massive form casting Harrison's survey team into shadow. "Ms. Harrison," Marcus said very quietly, "I'd suggest you choose your next words carefully. The beings you just called non-sapient animals have been granted full diplomatic recognition by the Galactic Council. They're also currently surrounding your landing party." For the first time, Harrison looked around and seemed to notice that she and her team were now in the center of a loose circle of dragons. Not threatening, but definitely attentive. Titan loomed behind her, his massive head tilted as if listening to a conversation in a language she couldn't understand. "This is intimidation," Harrison declared, though her voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. "Corporate security will be informed that we're being threatened by hostile aliens." Ember rumbled something in the complex tonal language that Marcus had been learning. He was far from fluent, but he caught the meaning, a question about whether these newcomers should be treated as guests or intruders. "They're potential guests," Marcus replied in the same language, earning surprised looks from the consortium team. But they seemed to have forgotten their manners. Sapphire approached from the side, carrying something in her claws. She set down a beautifully carved crystal bowl filled with what Marcus recognized as welcome fruit, a local delicacy that dragons traditionally offered to visitors. The gesture was unmistakably peaceful and generous. Harrison stared at the offering as if it might explode. "What does it want?" "She wants to welcome you properly," Marcus explained. "It's a traditional greeting. The fruit is considered a delicacy, quite delicious, actually." "I'm not eating alien food," Harrison said sharply. "We have work to do. Corporate deadlines don't wait for cultural activities." The rejection of Sapphire's gift caused a visible reaction among the dragons. Their postures shifted slightly, still not aggressive, but no longer welcoming. Ember's golden eyes fixed on Harrison with an intensity that made several consortium workers step backward. "Ms. Harrison," Ambassador Kortha's voice crackled over the communication system as he approached from the cultural center. "I've just received confirmation from the council headquarters on Centauri Prime. There is no authorization for mining operations on Pyraxis Prime. Your permits have been revoked pending investigation of falsified documents." Harrison's face flushed red above her environmental suit's collar. "That's impossible. We have billions invested in this operation. The council can't just change the rules." "The council didn't change the rules," Korth replied with diplomatic precision. "You attempted to circumvent them. The investigation has revealed that your permits were obtained using forged council seals and bribed officials. Several arrests have already been made." The consortium team began muttering among themselves, obviously realizing that their legal position had just collapsed. But Harrison wasn't finished. Fine, she snapped. If we can't mine here legally, we'll take what we need and sort out the paperwork later. Corporate losses need to be minimized. She turned toward her cargo haulers and activated her communication device. Bring the extraction equipment online. Full industrial operation, priority 1. The dragon's reaction was immediate and unmistakable. Every one of them raised their heads and let out a harmonized vocalization that shook the ground beneath everyone's feet. It wasn't quite a roar. It was something far more complex and organized. A warning that needed no translation. Ms. Harrison, Marcus said urgently. You need to stand down your operation immediately. You're threatening their home. These are just animals, Harrison insisted, but her voice cracked slightly as she looked around at the circle of dragons. They can't stop legitimate corporate operations. Ember stepped forward, positioning herself directly in front of Harrison. The dragon lowered her massive head until they were eye to eye, and when she spoke, her words were in perfect galactic standard. We are not animals, Ember said, her voice carrying the resonance of ancient authority. This is our world. You are not welcome here. The silence that followed was deafening. Harrison staggered backward, her face white with shock. In 6 months of contact, the dragons had never spoken galactic standard in front of outsiders. They had been content to let others assume they were learning the language slowly, through cultural exchange. You can speak, Harrison stammered. We have always spoken, Titan rumbled from behind her, also in perfect standard. We simply chose not to speak to those who came bearing weapons and greed. Sapphire approached Harrison again, this time without the welcome fruit. When the young dragon spoke, her voice carried disappointment rather than anger. You rejected our friendship. You dismissed our intelligence. You threatened our home. Why should we trust your species? Marcus felt a surge of pride mixed with concern. The dragon's reveal of their linguistic abilities was a powerful diplomatic moment, but it also escalated the situation dramatically. Harrison's corporate superiors would not take kindly to discovering that they had been outmaneuvered by beings they considered inferior. The game has changed, Ms. Harrison, Ambassador Korath observed. You're now dealing with a recognized sapient species that has just demonstrated advanced linguistic capabilities and clear territorial claims. Corporate law actually supports their position. Harrison's communication device crackled to life with urgent messages from her orbiting ships. The consortium fleet was requesting instructions, apparently aware that the ground situation had shifted dramatically. Stand down all equipment, Harrison ordered reluctantly. Return to orbit pending new instructions from corporate headquarters. As the consortium ships departed, leaving behind only Harrison's personal shuttle, Marcus found himself thinking about how much had changed since that first barbecue 6 months ago. The dragons had gone from being feared monsters to respected allies to acknowledged equals in the galactic community. Their patient approach to diplomacy had proven far more effective than centuries of military posturing. That evening, the cultural center hosted what had become a regular tradition, the Sunset Feast. Dragons and off-worlders gathered around multiple cooking stations, sharing food, stories, and knowledge. Harrison had been invited to join them, though she sat apart from the main groups, clearly struggling to process the day's revelations. Marcus approached her with a plate of food and a gentle smile. It's a lot to take in, he said, settling down nearby. When I first arrived, I thought I was just going to cook some steaks for hungry aliens. Harrison accepted the food, but didn't immediately eat. They're actually intelligent. Sophisticated. We've been planning to strip mine their entire planet. That's the thing about assumptions, Marcus replied. They can blind us to the truth right in front of us. But it's never too late to change course. Ember approached their conversation area, moving with the careful grace she used around beings who were still learning to trust. She settled down nearby and spoke in galactic standard. Your species interests us, she said to Harrison. You show great passion for your goals, even when those goals are misguided. That passion could be directed toward better purposes. Harrison looked up at the massive dragon, her expression a mixture of fear and fascination. What kind of purposes? Learning, Titan rumbled from across the gathering. Teaching, building, creating. The thermal crystals you seek can be harvested without destroying the ecosystem. We know methods your species has not discovered. You would share that knowledge? Harrison asked, surprised. Even after we threatened your home? Sapphire's response carried the wisdom that Marcus had come to associate with the Dragon Collective. Sharing knowledge creates abundance for all. Hoarding it creates only conflict and scarcity. We learned this long before your species achieved spaceflight. As the stars appeared in Pyraxis Prime's sky, Harrison made a decision that would reshape the relationship between corporate interests and newly discovered species throughout the galaxy. She activated her communication device and began composing a message to consortium headquarters, not a request for extraction equipment, but a proposal for a joint research initiative. The barbecue had ended the age of violence between dragons and spacefarers. Now it was time to begin the age of true partnership. 3 years later, the Pyraxis Thermal Engineering Institute would be recognized as the most advanced energy research facility in known space, operated jointly by dragons and multiple galactic species. The techniques developed there would revolutionize space travel, planetary engineering, and sustainable resource extraction across hundreds of worlds. And, at the center of it all, Marcus Chun continued to operate his grills, proving every day that the best diplomacy often started with a good meal and an open mind. The dragons had taught the galaxy that intelligence came in many forms, but it was humanity that had shown them the universal language of food shared among friends.